product is going up and down, or?
Oh, that could be.
So I'm just saying.
I mean, we're scaling. He's got incredible
You're still
demand.
working with them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great. All right,
Sorry.
well, let's just go ahead and get started. Also, so you'll know, so this is being, I guess it's being live streamed. Is that what they do with it? So I'm happy to keep this informal since there's not many of us here.
You're getting live streamed, or we're getting live streamed?
It's just the audio.
Great.
Yes,
Okay.
right. Okay, so as most people in the room know, I'm Sonia Ricky. I'm an attorney with the Forrest firm. It's a statewide firm, and we are a full services business law firm. So we've got offices in Wilmington, lots in the Triangle, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and we handle everything from trademark, patent formations, and then litigation and dispute resolution. So my experience, I actually went to UNC Asheville for college, and then Chapel Hill for law school. Practiced in Texas for a couple of years, and then I've been in Asheville for a little over 3 years.
Great.
So yeah, so my practice is included in the business law realm, the transactional side of like drafting documents, advising business owners, to the litigation, dispute resolution, courtroom work as well. And so I think that's helpful. It just gives me a perspective of how those terms and agreements play out in court. All right, so this presentation is just going to be, you know, some of the information involved in getting a business started, or if your business has already been formed, maybe taking a look at some of those organizational documents to make sure you've got the information in there that will protect you. And a lot of this information is probably going to be things that you've heard of, so topics, obviously limited liability, things like that, but hopefully it'll provide a little more detail. So the first question is always, why have limited liability? Why create an entity like an LLC or corporation?
Yeah, I want to do that. Thank you.
So obviously limited liability is the benefit that everybody knows about. If you create one of those entities, then you separate your personal account and your personal liability from that of the entity. So if your LLC was to enter into a commercial lease agreement, the LLC would be on the hook for fulfilling those obligations. And they wouldn't be able to go after the individual unless there's a personal guarantee or something like that that's additionally asked for.
And my reason for wanting to make an LLC is a little unusual. I have to keep a lid on my income. So I paint. And so if I sell paintings, that'll raise my income. But if I form an LLC, my understanding is that I can have the profits directed to somebody else, like my brother or whatever.
Okay,
So
that might be something, that might be something that we can talk about in more detail.
Yeah, I'm just throwing that out as saying it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. So obviously we have the idea of limited liability. If you form an LLC or corporation, then there's that level of separation. But more than that, there's still an opportunity for parties to what is called pierce the corporate veil. So there's still an opportunity for them to pierce that limited liability protection and come after the individual. This is not something that happens regularly. One of the big takeaways I got from business law in law school was this is very challenging to prove, but it's still there. So you want to keep in mind, other than just having a formed entity, you want to make sure that you follow the corporate formalities, and also that you keep your finances and your accounts separate.
And what's great about that, excuse me for interrupting, is Sacklers. It's in the news. You know, the huge pharmaceutical company, and they're billionaires. And so they're going after them for opioids, even though they're the owners and the corporation is separate. But they're being sued for billions of dollars. And because of information and emails and such, have you noticed this in the news, the Sacklers? Well, anyway, because of information and emails and such, them going back and forth with the company, they're actually, the veil is pierced. They're going to personally have to pay billions of dollars.
Okay, yeah, I haven't been paying attention to that, but a lot of times that's a theory that, you know, a cause of action that people can bring in a lawsuit if they think there might be a connection there, intermingling or something like that. So it's just important to take that extra action of showing that the entity is separate from the individual. Corporate formalities that should be followed are things like, that's why it's so important to have these initial organizational documents that kind of show the organization of the company, how the company should be run. We'll talk about that in more detail, but it's also things like keeping track of resolutions being passed, so showing the thought process of the company. And so for things that are outside of the ordinary course of running your business, it's helpful, like if you're getting a loan or you're buying a piece of property and that's not part of your day-to-day activities, then it's a good idea to keep track and show that the people who are in charge of making decisions in that entity have approved that decision. And that's just helpful. That's good practice for making future decisions. You can keep track of why, what's the reason for getting that loan or buying the piece of real property. But it also shows that there's an individual mind and thought process for the entity than for the individual owners. All right, so the state of formation, this can generally be a pretty easy question. Generally, it's a question of using Delaware or the state where their primary operations are occurring. And really the push towards Delaware is if you're planning on getting a lot of outside capital. Investment companies are used to dealing with Delaware law, so it's less due diligence that they have to do to be up to date on North Carolina state law. So when you form an entity, you are forming it in a state, and those state laws can fill in holes if you haven't included, the organization and who has management control over the company. But it also can govern interpretation of those internal documents as well.
Is this sort of like an offshore account? Delaware is easy on LLCs as opposed
So
to...
the reason for that is because Delaware has a long history of having being business conscious, which means that they've quickly made changes to their laws to make it more business friendly. And they also have formed business courts that have been around for a while. So there's a lot of established case law as to how these statutes are interpreted or how different provisions are interpreted.
Do they profit from your forming your LLC in Delaware?
So there are always fees that a business has to pay. So there's like filing fees initially, we'll get to that. There's state taxes. So they certainly benefit, and there's an interest in drawing businesses to Delaware. North Carolina also has business courts as well, which is pretty great. I think we've got 4 now, I want to say. And so I think that's definitely helping bring more businesses to North Carolina.
Thanks.
All right, so as far as the entity choice, there's generally, I'm going to talk about a couple of different entities with limited liability. Generally, the discussion is between LLCs and corporations, and some of the considerations being made are regarding taxes. I think at this point, I definitely recommend that you have an accountant involved to help you evaluate what some of those implications are going to look like. Your attorney can help with that as well. But the main tax consideration that's made is if you have a corporation, there's double taxation. What that means is the income of the corporation is taxed at that level, and then any amounts that are received by the shareholders are also taxed. So if you have an LLC, generally the way that's taxed is it's pass-through taxation, and the entity, the LLC itself, does not pay taxes. That'll be paid by the individual owners or members. So that's one of the benefits of getting an LLC. The other thing is with corporations, there's more corporate formalities, there's annual meetings, things like that. So a lot of times people would choose the LLC because it's just a little less time and requirements that they have to fulfill.
Can you transform an LLC into a corporation?
You can.
Easily? Okay.
I don't want to say fairly easily, but there is an option to do that. Yeah. But it's always, I think it's always best up front to be aware of what your intentions are. If you're intending on raising capital pretty quickly or getting a lot of outside funding, then I would recommend a corporation for the same reasons we talked about with incorporating in Delaware.
Okay.
And that's just corporations have been around a lot longer. There's more flexibility. There's a lot of flexibility with LLCs and structuring LLCs, but with corporations, as far as different membership interest and things like that, people are used to dealing with that with corporations. So.
And none of this applies to nonprofits. That's a whole nother area.
It's a bit different. I mean, you'll see, we're going to talk about operating agreements.
Okay.
Some of like the documents that you file with the Secretary of State are going to be a little different,
Yeah.
but it's the same process for the most
But
part.
it's a different entity. They don't cross over to each other. In
What do
other
you mean
words,
by
an
that?
LLC has nothing to do with nonprofit.
So a nonprofit is it's a corporation.
Okay.
It's a not-for-profit
Okay. Thank you.
corporation. But there are different filings involved.
Yeah.
And obviously different tax considerations, things
And
like
so
that.
it's okay.
And for a B Corp, is that something that you service as well?
Yeah, so B Corps in North Carolina, and Martha, you might have more information on how B Corps are treated, but in North Carolina, it's not a separate designation pursuant to state law. In some states that is, so.
Yeah,
There's some process you have to go through though to
Right.
designate it.
So it's important to make sure that you're talking about the same thing. So what Sonia is talking about is state formation. And so there are states where you can be a benefit corporation that's a lowercase benefit. That's a lowercase b. That's not a formal name. Like certified B Corp is a formal name. It's a trademarked entity that is regulated by B Labs, which is an exhaustive auditing process. Sort of similar to what universities go through in order to get their accreditation.
It's private or for profit?
No, B Labs is a not-for-profit
Oh,
entity.
okay.
But in order to be a certified B Corp, you have to be a for-profit business. So
Okay.
it's two completely different things. Like certified B Corp is like a seal of approval on your business practices.
I think that's what it's
Little B benefit corporation is how you register with the state. So in Delaware, you can register as a benefit corporation and it insulates you from certain shareholder actions based on how you make decisions for your stakeholders. North Carolina does not have a benefit corporation statute. It has been introduced in the General Assembly multiple times, but never passed.
Is that still worth the effort?
In our opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's also in North
I have a company that's thinking
Carolina-
about doing it, and it's the
Yeah.
auditing process seems to be very intense.
It is. In North Carolina,
I
we
think
have a pretty good presence.
French Broad just hit done that.
JL's been a huge advocate for it. So
Yeah, I think that's where it's coming from, and so
yeah,
we're trying to figure out the next steps.
Well, then definitely we need to get whoever the companies are, we need to get them in touch with the local B Corp community because we have a meeting on Wednesday and I can try to match them up with some mentors to help.
Oh, you have, okay, let me see where he is in the, it's Ben Colvin, Devil's Foot.
Okay, yeah. I think he's probably already on our list of
He may
people to
be.
reach out to, but we can pair people with mentors to help them get through the process.
And did you say that Little B Corp is in effect nonprofits?
So a benefit corporation with a lower B
Yeah, that's what I'm
is a state statute that enables the company to do business in consideration of shareholder or stakeholders beyond just the shareholders of the corporation. So it's a completely different thing from what we're talking about, which is certified B corporation, which is like a seal of approval, like like appliances have the green certification.
FDA or something like that.
So it's a
Can you get that for a nonprofit?
no. In order to be a certified B corporation,
She
you
wants a
must be a
nonprofit.
for-profit company.
Okay.
Do you run a nonprofit?
No, she wants.
No, I want to do one.
Oh, you
but I
wanna do
was
one,
thinking
okay.
Having a seal of approval on a nonprofit would be
But
There's
fabulous.
gotta be some
probably is
designation.
There's
sort
probably
of-
something else.
But
Because people are very shy about nonprofits. They're like, this might be bogus, So it would be nice if there was an entity that would say, no, we've looked at it, it's okay.
Sure.
Sorry,
Yeah.
hope I'm not interrupting.
There's gotta be
No,
something
not
out there
at
though.
all.
There's gotta be something out there
I would hope.
that has that. All right.
No, you're
Am I
good.
making me
Do
crazy?
we hijack
No,
that?
not at all. Not at all.
Sorry.
I'm sure everybody else is
Okay.
fine with it.
Lucky it's a small group. I've
Yes.
been a lot. Okay.
Okay, so I think, okay, so the first thing I think we finished talking about. So C Corps are the default category that you get if you file under the state to have a corporation. You can be an S corporation. That is a tax election that you make. And what that does is it is treated with pass-through taxation. So similar to what we talked about LLCs, You are not taxed at the corporate level. You would then be taxed at the shareholder level. But there are some limitations to making that S election, one of which is that it limits the amount of owners that you can have, shareholders that you can have, so it has to be 100 or less. And then it also has a lot of limitations on the different classes of stock that you can have. So if you're looking to grow pretty quickly, to have a lot of outside investments, things like that, outside investors, then an S election will be challenging for that, just because there's not going to be a lot of classes that you can have for stock. So as far as other entity choices that we see, there's professional LLCs. I'm pretty sure nobody here cares very much about professional LLCs, but that's so that the ownership is held by people who are licensed in that profession. And then there's also an added step of going out and getting approval from the groups that regulate and license those professions. And then limited partnerships are something that we also see. That has limited liability as well. Generally, those are used when a pool of people are investing in something. So like with real estate, it can be helpful if a group of people are investing and they would be the limited partners who don't have limited liability.
If you get financial support in a nonprofit, is that considered an investment, or is that a different category? So if someone wants to give you money, a charitable donation, say.
So that would be a donation.
It's different.
If there's
Okay,
no,
great.
yeah.
So
So
they're not expecting any return.
Right.
They're just saying, here's some money. Okay, just want to be sure.
so the first step is going to be filing the articles of incorporation or articles of organization. This is with the state, and generally it's with the Secretary of State's office. So that's the case in Texas, it's the case here. Articles of incorporation are if you're trying to form a corporation, and articles of organization are going to be if you're forming an LLC. The information that generally that you need for that form is going to be so you don't even have to give member name or that specific information, which is helpful to some business owners if they want to be a little more silent as to their role. But so you can include information for an organizer, which is the person who's setting up the entity and filing those original documents. So they also need a registered agent and a registered address, and this is just simply to have the individual that you can reach out to or contact. If there's a lawsuit that's served against the entity, the registered agent with the registered address is going to be one way to contact that company. There are also filing fees that are required. So the filing fees right now are $125 for articles of organization. And then you also pay annual fees. And it's important to continue to file the annual fees timely and to file annual reports. The reason for that is because the Secretary of State can administratively dissolve your entity. And that's if you are not fulfilling those obligations. If that happens, you can likely get it reinstated if there's not a lot of time that's passed, but certainly it opens you up to arguments of piercing the corporate veil, or if you're aware that your entity has been dissolved and you try to enter into a contract with that knowledge, then you can be personally responsible as well. The next step would be to get an EIN number, and if you open a bank account, then they're going to ask for this number. And you can do that on the IRS website. Make sure you're on the IRS website and not a third-party site that is just asking for that information, and we'll file it for you. And you, yes, yeah.
Is that those guys in Moldova?
Could be.
You never know. You just Google it, right? And then pick the top couple of links. And you gotta be careful.
.gov, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're on that site, but and you can get your EIN number immediately, so that's great. As soon as you input the information, they'll pop out your EIN number. All right, so just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the organizational documents that are involved. Mostly, I'm going to talk about the bylaws or operating agreement and some of the issues that are addressed there. So these are really important documents. Bylaws are generally what's involved with corporations, and operating agreements are going to be LLC. They address a lot of issues, and they do it at a time when everybody's on the same page, as opposed to trying to deal with these later on. And they also show that there's a separation again between the thought process and the choices for the entity versus whoever the owners are and what they choose to do with the business and business decisions in that way.
Just to reconfirm, but you did mention that a nonprofit is in the corporate area, not that it's not an LLC. So,
No, it's not an LLC.
okay, so both of these issues, two issues I'm interested in. Okay.
So yes, operating agreements are something that you're also going to have with
For a
nonprofits.
nonprofit.
Right.
Okay.
So there's a number of things that you can address in operating agreements. The first one is going to be the purpose. I'm generally, when I talk about this, going to talk about LLCs just because it's helpful, easier for me in that context.
Okay.
But so the purpose of a LLC or nonprofit or any corporation, and generally you want this to be pretty wide ranging in scope, just because there's not really going to be any restrictions that you need to worry about. If you are a minority interest owner in an LLC, this may be an area where you want to be more restrictive, and that's just so you can restrict the actions that the majority can take. So the operating agreement is also a good place where if you're a minority interest owner, you want to be cautious of ways that you can limit what the majority can do without you also agreeing.
I was interested that I got a book on managing nonprofits,
Mm-hmm.
and the point he made was that you should have your description be like 2 sentences, whereas I'd been thinking you needed to spell out exactly what you
The
wanted to
scope,
do.
yeah.
Yeah, he said just write down you want to do X.
Yeah, generally you'll see language that's just saying any legal business that the company decides
Yeah.
to take on, or
Like I want to help stray dogs, and he's like, that's enough.
or even, I would recommend something more general
Yeah.
than that, just so you can
But I'm saying I was very
Pivot.
surprised because
It's more general.
any
animals.
legally business under
Oh, wow.
to be carried out, or
Something like
but
that.
as
Yeah.
somebody who's completely doesn't know a thing about this, I would think I was going to have to write up this really detailed account of what I was going to
Right.
be doing. So I got this book. He said, no.
yeah, think about it from this perspective. If later on, say you want to pivot and maybe sell
Cats.
sell cats or dog food or something like that, you don't want to have to worry about revising the operating agreement in other documents so that
Yeah.
you can be allowed to do that. You want to keep it pretty wide scope initially, but again, there is some consideration or extra consideration if you're a minority interest owner.
Thank you.
So the other area that's often discussed is going to be just management. So with a corporation, that's you generally see, so it's the owners or stockholders, the board of directors or the brains, essentially they make the big decisions, and then the officers are the ones that carry out the day-to-day operations, implement the decisions made by the board of directors. With LLCs, one of the benefits is that it's pretty flexible in the organization. So you can have an LLC by default, it's governed by the managers, and the members are the owners of the LLC. So you basically can have it where the members / owners are the managers, and they also are officers running the day-to-day business. You can also set it up to where it's like a corporation in the sense that the members are going to be like the shareholders. The managers are going to be, a board of managers like the board of directors, and then you can have officers as well. So that flexibility is one of the reasons why people often like to use LLCs as well. So another point that's important to bring up in the operating agreement is going to be the transfer of ownership interests. So you can limit what groups the owners can transfer their interest to. This is helpful if there's not many of you, if you're a closely held business. You don't want any third party to be able to purchase that interest in the company. So you can limit it to family, businesses owned by family or other members.
Can you do it by name, like say these people? No?
Generally, that's too restrictive
Okay.
because there's changes that can
Okay.
happen. But one of the things that you can do is build in an opportunity for the company first to have a chance to purchase that person's shares at the same price or their membership interest. And then after that, there'll be a period of time, generally you can build in where other members have the opportunity to purchase that shares or the interest at the same price.
Okay, and this is, again, we're talking LLCs on this one, right?
But also,
It's also corporate.
So you can put some restrictions on
Okay,
transfer as
thank
well.
you.
With, so the next important concept is going to be buy-sell events. So these are events like the death of a member filing bankruptcy, divorce, things like that, disability. This is particularly important to plan for ahead of time, simply because these are not things that you want to deal with when they actually occur. A situation or a case that I was involved in was where there was an entity, and this is a really simplified version of it, but there was an entity, it had a number of members. One of the members declared bankruptcy. What happened though is the entity, all of its assets were being secured by a loan, and that loan was set to mature in a couple of months. So generally there would be no problem in getting a refinance because they had assets that were protected. But because a member declared bankruptcy, nobody wanted to refinance that loan. So because there was this built-in protection as to what happened, the company had an opportunity to buy those interests, and then they were able to get refinanced.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because they put that in automatically.
Right, right. And then also whenever it's already, so this is when all of the members are making this decision up front. And what's also helpful is the next step is valuation. So
in a bankruptcy, had you not done that, his assets or his shares would have been transferred into the bankruptcy.
The bankruptcy trustee would have had control. So these events in particular, so death, bankruptcy, and divorce, these are instances where a third party may be able to have control or gain those ownership interests. So that's why it's particularly helpful to allow the company or other members to purchase those. So valuation comes into play there too. It's a great idea to have a method of evaluating the business beforehand, as opposed to when one person's trying to sell and the other person's trying to buy. And so one of the ways you can do that is just agree to an appraisal process. But there are a couple of different ways you can value the business throughout the same time period. But you definitely want to have some language in there as to how that happens, because in the bankruptcy example I gave you guys, you don't want to have to spend time really negotiating and trying to figure out how to value it. It's easier at that time just to plug in, hey, this is what we've decided. This is how we're going to go about evaluating the business.
Oh, okay.
And then the final is going to be deadlock. So if it comes to the point where all of the owners of a business are not able to agree, like if there's 50-50 interest and they're not able to come to an agreement, it's a good idea to have language in there that talks about what that means, what the next steps are. And sometimes that language can mean that they appoint a temporary manager to make the decisions at that point for a limited period of time. Okay, so other considerations. So I don't really have much time to go into a lot of detail. I certainly want to mention at this time the importance of trademarks and patents. So we do have attorneys at our firm who specialize in those areas. Before you choose an entity name, it's helpful to have an attorney perform a clearance search. And that's essentially where they research and see if there's other people out there using the similar names or social media names that you're planning on using, whether they have a better right or claim to that than you do. And just evaluating those risks and seeing if you want to work with a different name or if you want to move forward with that one.
And you can do that online.
There is an opportunity to do that on the government website, but that is one aspect of the search, but it's not. I mean, so they basically look through registered trademarks, but there's also, and again, this is not my area, so this is just sort of general knowledge. There are also common law claims to trademarks, and so that's not going to be necessarily things that are registered with the trademark office. Okay. And then another consideration is going to be state regulations. So I've done some work for adult care home facilities. There are a ton of regulations, including obviously how you treat the patients, maintenance of the facility, how regular cleaning of the facility, things like that. So you certainly want to make sure if there are regulations out there that you're complying with them. And then finally, it's just a final reminder, it's always a great idea to have your accountant involved when you're forming your business. There's a lot of tax implications, and then also to talk with an insurance agent who can help you identify ways in which you can further limit your liability and be protected.
Great.
Yep. So that's essentially it. You guys have any questions or? No? You got any questions?
Well, well, I'm big surprise, yeah.
No
So
way.
I could
Got more.
proceed to look into forming an LLC online. But I could, are you here in Asheville all the time? If I wanted to?
Yeah, so I have an office here. My card's up front. If
Right.
you want to take one.
So I'm on Social Security, so I don't really have money to throw around. But I also don't want to set up something that's not set up right, completely wrong, you know, whatever, because what's the point? So
Right.
I would have sort of try to make it very minimal for you to say, you know, this is what I've done. And maybe you could just peruse it and tell me some next steps and I could pay you for that meeting. Does it work that way?
Generally, it's going to take a lot more than just reviewing what's been done. It takes longer than an hour or whatever to review it, particularly with the operating agreement. That's more intensive. Certainly willing to see if there might be somebody at our firm who would be willing to help. We do have an attorney who his specific practice area is in nonprofits.
Okay.
But again, that's just going to have to be a conversation as to what
Okay,
those
so I
things would
could
look like.
ask you and you could direct me.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, great. Well, thanks for coming, guys.
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
And
Now I
Are
know
you
somebody to
with Polite?
call when I need.
Yeah,
When I
absolutely.
run right across somebody that needs these services.
oh, okay.
I'm Sonia's colleague.
Oh, cool.
Yes, Martha Bradley, also an attorney with the Forest
Nice
Firm.
to meet you.
Showing solidarity.
So as far as my thought of wanting to look into Plastic Bank, I suppose I should try to research what the ones are that are set up.